Here is the incident. I'm leaving the hotel room, and my partner asks me whether or not to bring the key. I evaluate. I want to have my computer running while away and things charging, but I don't want to be held up in the bad weather. So I say, yes, we'll bring the key. And then I return and ask the hotel desk clerk to open the door under the impression that the key is in the lock. My partner then tells me that she has taken the key, and I forgot that I asked her to. I criticize her for not paying attention. I tell the bell clerk, never mind. We go up, open the door, and as we get to the door, I remember that I had that thought about the weather and not having to bother the hotel in bad weather, and so I had wanted the key taken. I don't remember telling her to take the key, but since I had that thought, it's most likely I did. And so I say, I think I made a mistake. I'm sorry for criticizing you, because I think I did ask you to bring the key. And we go inside. Now, this is a small event in one hand. On the other hand, it is major. And I want to build up the event and incident layer by layer so that you can have a sense of what's going on. So the first layer happens in the 0 to 4 age range, when I was being regularly pummeled by the family dog, who was not trained and who would leap on me, being 2 to 3 times my size, knock me over and chase me in tall grasses. That's number one, is this dog. Number two, my parents, having suffered enormous abuse in their childhood, had varying degrees of dissociation and complex PTSD of their own, with an inability to feel, an inability to bond emotionally. So that's item number two. Item number three was that my father had a perverse, violent streak, which would express itself physically, erratically, and explosively, and that my mother had a completely tuned out but then explosive rage when she was scared, that would also kind of go from vacancy, emotional vacancy, to explosive presence. And one of my earliest memories is not only being knocked over by the dog, but of an incident where she left the gas on, went to light the oven, It exploded in her face, and she screamed in absolute terror and then looked at me. And it was striking because in between these extreme traumas for her, she was not present mentally and emotionally in her body there for me. As a result, I could not turn to them for emotional repair of the regular traumas that I experienced both at their hands, at the dog's hand, and in life in general hand. Now the next piece is that they chose to isolate us from both media and other neighbors. So they were the entire world to me. So thus concentrating their impact, both positive and negative. And that the combination of all of these things happening left me in a state of deep trauma, number one, but more importantly, without the softening refuge of a place to go to repair it. Because that is a very, very key thing. As a result, my body, in its traumatic biological system of self-protection, got turned on in this your life is threatened mode and did not get turned off. The signal within the body in complex PTSD got confused. And as a result of this confusion, from that point to the present day, my body regularly sends me biological chemical messages that says your life is in danger. And this produces terror, fear, anxiety, rage, helplessness, frustration, regardless of whether or not anything else is actually going on. So that's layer one in this incident. Now, layer two was that in an unstable and unbalanced household, where there were no boundaries, there was no sense of respect for things and boundaries, whether it was my father reading my mother's private diary, even if it had a lock, or mother and father entering rooms without knocking, borrowing things without permission, not keeping promises, not having a clear daily routine, not being in integrity with their own stated values. Boundaries of all shapes and forms, including physical boundaries if we were hit or touched sensually without being tuned in, or even things like saying, "Mom, this is painful to me, stop," and having those messages be ignored, even in playtime, left a sense of boundarylessness. And particularly when you get the message that your life is in danger, the need for certainty is exacerbated. The need for certainty is present in all human beings, but it is exacerbated in this situation. You absolutely need to be able to depend on something. So that's the human need. Now, the thing that I did, realizing that I had no person, I could not, that neither the dog nor my little sister, who for part of that was born 2 years younger than me, nor either of my parents, my soul world, could be depended on for any kind of certainty. And so, given that my body was sending chronic traumatic chemical messages saying that your life is in danger, given that my life felt like it was in danger on a regular basis, given the extreme isolation and pain and loneliness of not being able to emotionally connect with either parent to the degree necessary to heal the trauma, I shifted the certainty principle from either routine or stability of how the world works to things. In a healthy human relationship, you have certainty that your parents are looking out for you. You have certainty that you are safe. And these are the relational and emotional certainties provided by a healthy relationship. When those are not present, then the adaptive and creative self finds certainty in another way. In this case, the certainty of things. And this did provide stability because, as a very sensitive and meticulous person who understood mechanics and had strong kinetic intelligence, things worked very, very well for me. Things did what I expected them to do. I understood things. I had a clear coherence around things. So I developed an intense bond with things with the clear agenda of them being what was certain in my life, that I could count on my things to behave like my things and could focus my security on those things to substitute for the incoherence, the lack of integrity, the boundarylessness within my parents. So moving the need for security from the need to depend on my parents to protect me, be in integrity, respect boundaries, regulate, and help me be safe, to the certainty that things would behave the way I expected them, and that therefore this creates a new code that answers the ongoing chronic chemical messages from the body that I am not safe, that I am overwhelmed, that I am helpless. So the answer looked like security equals things behaving predictably. Number two, in order that my things did behave predictably, I would carefully track and observe where all my things were and assess where I put things. And then two, I would regularly review, so place them carefully, and then review. And if my things were where I put them in the way that I wanted them to be, I could reassure myself that I was in fact safe, because the location the certainty allocation location was stable. So if you're looking for your stability because parents are consistently protecting you, doing what they say, attuning to you, respecting boundaries, and have a clear routine, then anytime you feel terrified and traumatized, you return to the home as a child, and then you see that things are still going on consistently and predictably and honestly. And as a result, you are now safe. When none of that is present, since the body cannot survive in a state of terror without certainty, some new method of certainty has to be created. This is it. So this becomes the new question. Are my things where I placed them? Do they still behave the way they should be behaving as these things? Now, because my parents did not always honor these things, and because no one understood the importance that things had come to represent, no one understood the helplessness and the paralyzing panic, despair, and frustration, the sense of overwhelm and helplessness that I was flooded with as a result of things not being where they were. Because our sense of emotional, mental science is so flimsy and uneducated within all cultures, but most of all in Western cultures such as America, that it would never be considered what the design process of a heart and mind would be in this kind of situation. Even identifying with an infant and understanding that, a 3-foot long dog being chased or toppled by, chasing and toppling a 2-foot tall infant that can move 1/10 of the speed, that doesn't have security, is terrifying. That this is equivalent to, just imagine how you and I would feel if literally an 18-foot long, 2-ton lion, 18 feet long, started leaping out erratically and regularly at any point in what we were doing, and that no one was there to protect us, and that it was completely vulnerable and helpless, and we had no sense of making sense of that. So imagining how absolutely freaked out you, as a mature person, 40, 50, 60 years old, with a Western education, maybe comfortable with a gun and all that. Even with a gun, the odds of you being able to shoot an 18-foot long, 2-ton lion before it killed you is very weak, and it will be traumatizing either way. And so, but for a newly born infant who is in a state of overwhelm, abandonment, a lot of unknown and stuff, this is devastating. And so what happened was, in the way that many barbaric and brutal childhood associations are, is as soon as there's a sense that this is really important to someone, like what do bullies do? As soon as they learn that you really care about this book, they take the book from you, they throw it in the pond, etc. So there was some of that taunting, shaming, humiliating the desperation of the feeling. But there was much more just disregard. A parent attitude, I'm going to take and do what I want with your things because really they're not even your things. We bought them for you. Without realizing that in doing so, there's what they're messing with is the very, very, very fragile shield that is the only rational protection that I had against the chronic physical messages that my life is in danger, that I had some rational defense to say, no, it isn't. There is something in my life that I can depend on. And when that is messed with, then there is complete exposure to that helplessness. So this is the the situation that then led me to do something which in and of itself was quite frightening, to establish and hold a boundary with my parents, which I did in my teen years with buying and putting a lock on the door. And every single time I left the room, I locked it. If I was going to get a drink of water, if I was going to the toilet, if I was going down to the kitchen, I locked the door meticulously, because the despair, the helplessness, the terror of coming back to find that someone with zero respect for the impact, with zero respect for all of the helplessness and terror induced, was just going in there just to fuck with me, was so intense that I wasn't sure how I would handle it. And that in itself felt frightening, because it then becomes one more unknown, an unknown variable. So it felt really important to protect that part of myself with this mechanism. So that led to an ongoing sense of an absolute desperate need to maintain certainty in some way that didn't depend on people, whether it was through things, whether it was through clear agreements, whether it was through having control of my own time, a variety of things along those lines. Now, then what gets added to this along the way is, as an adult, these things and certain areas of control are still providing the protective shield against the devastating aspect of this chronic physical message. Your life is in danger, you're in danger, your life is in danger, you're in danger. And the more control I can take of things and of my life, the more I can have a basis of a confident answer that says, yes, body, I know you feel that way, but I have control of this. Just look, I locked this door and it's still locked. I put this thing down and it hasn't moved an inch. I put this thing here. This thing is doing exactly what I told it to. As a result, I am now safe. And the body at least doesn't escalate. Sometimes it might calm down a bit and then start up around the next little trigger. But at least it wouldn't escalate. But as soon as anyone would come into my space, first of all, then there's a new panic because no one, again, understands the fragility of this shield and what it's protecting. And so, first of all, as a younger person, complete isolation was necessary to maintain this level of boundary. I just can't have people in my space. That became even more important when, despite the lock and despite, the protection of things, I went into a deep depression, and I needed a new sense of boundary which went beyond the control of my things, which was control of my time, because there was no schedule in the house. And at that point, I was out of school, and so there was zero schedule in my life, none at home, none out of the home, and in many cases I stayed in my room in order to just maintain more of a sense of control around something that was denied, because this is what added to the sense of unsafety. Was every time I had ever talked with a teacher or adult, including my parents, about any of my fear, any of my anger, any of my rage, any of my disgust at being lied to, at having things pushed past, at moving, I was not heard, I was not respected, I was not understood, I was not reassured, I was not thanked for talking, I was not given any kind of an honoring response. Instead, I was shamed, criticized for having any negative feelings about my parents or the situation. I was shamed and confused by telling me how lucky I was relative to most children in the world. And I was punished in one way or another with a hostile, angry, and defensive energy, and received zero validation. There was never an instance of having any basis for these feelings validated, which meant that in order not to go insane, because anytime my things were moved at all, these very feelings of terror, hurt, anger, resentment, rage, hate bubbled up, intensified, because what the hurt, anger, fear, rage, and all was about was, it all boiled down to, you were not there to protect me. You hurt me. You betrayed me in my time of greatest vulnerability. And you're such cowards. You're lying about it. You're so ill-equipped to be parents. You don't even get it. You're so dissociated from your own abusive childhood. You have no idea what it's like to be your child. And it's horrible. And there's no relief from that. So given that things were the only thing that protected me from this, and that these feelings that I could not control from bubbling up would bubble up if my things were messed with, protecting my things became not only a way to protect myself from these traumatic feelings, but to protect my parents' lies and my teachers' lies and the other parent and adult lies around me, none of whom wanted to understand, did understand, wanted to validate, or did validate a single feeling, which meant that to protect any sense of safety in those relationships, I could not have those feelings bubbling up uncontrollably. And trauma by its nature is an uncontrollable force. You can't control someone's feelings when they believe and feel that their life is in danger. You can't. No amount of rationality works, because it is not rational. It is highly irrational for someone to be having those kinds of feelings and be in an environment where no one understands and wants to understand the feelings. That is an irrational and unsafe environment. Well, given that there's not a single adult in the entire paradigm of childhood to turn to for validation, for support, for safety, for understanding, going into those feelings becomes profoundly dangerous, because it means destroying the trust in every single adult around me before I can take care of myself. It means becoming the enemy of every adult who does not want to hear, acknowledge, or deal with those feelings or the truths that are underneath those feelings. And it means that I need to recognize that I am still not safe, because the truth that is coming through the data of my emotions is not weighing, is not counting for anything, is not triggering any support. It is triggering a basis of proactive and reactive denial and suppression. And this, I don't have the language to articulate to myself or anyone else. So it is vitally important that I not be confronted with this truth before I have the skill and ability to deal with it. And so it is an obsession to manage the stability of my things. They have a symbolic meaning that is 100 times more important to me than the things themselves. But they are also the substitutes in the absence of any substantive emotional connection with either parent. The few gifts they had given and the things that I had collected from around the house as my things became the substitute for love. And they were also very important on that basis. There was a scarcity around these things. And so I was very, very meticulous around those things and had a very intimate and detailed relationship, which allowed me to, become very good at mechanics and engineering in various areas growing up. Now, this fragility and the awareness that this brought me into conflict with people. So I could not help noticing by the time I was 15 or so that the way I needed to relate to my things was not only not understood, but it was not common. Number two, that because it was not common and was not understood, that the probability field that I could get close to anyone and still maintain this uncommon relationship with my things, like don't touch that, don't move that. It's like just moving something a foot without asking me felt like a really big deal. It's like there's a part of me that doesn't know if I'm still safe or not, if someone can still move, if someone can move my stapler, pick it up, and then put it down without asking me, there's a biological message that's saying you're not safe, you're not in control. But there's also a sense of what else might they do that would bring that up. And this anxiety naturally leads then to a clamping down. Don't touch anything without my permission. Well, that's easy to solve, except that the reactions of people, well, that's weird. I don't like that. Go be by yourself then. You're weird. Why? And keep touching my things as they're talking about it, felt unsafe to such a degree that there's then a choice to isolate so as to protect this stability coping mechanism that is far from ideal. But given the amount of physical messages chronic within the body that I'm not safe, given the constant underlying fear and anxiety, it was far more preferable to maintain this coping mechanism than be thrust into a new trauma of being traumatized for reasons I didn't understand. Because it's not like I sat down at age 6 and said, I have completely fucked up parents and no one around will help and listen. Let me transfer all of my all of my psychological need for certainty onto things. And from this point forward, until I have my own house, I will do this. And then when I meet some safe people, I'll transfer some of that safety back to safe people. No, it's an instinctive adaptation. So then comes social isolation to a large extent, which in turn, knowing that I need it but not knowing why, is a source of anxiety. But now we come to this present moment built up on all of these different layers. And this is the pattern that comes up over and over again. I put my raincoat bundled up in a corner where I know it won't be moved, and I psychologically place a weight of certainty that will stay there. My girlfriend walks over, picks it up, and starts to put it in a new location because she says the water will dry better there. And I feel outraged. She didn't ask me. I've asked her 5 times, stop being helpful. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of this pattern of you volunteering this completely irrational helpfulness, meaning I've told you I know what I need, I know what I want. Let me know if you want to be helpful, and I'll tell you how to be helpful. I will come up with something helpful for you to do, and it will be what I want. Just stop it. Stop this helpfulness. And what I'm wanting to do is stop her from stepping into this terrain that she is clueless about, destroying my sense of security, and then triggering a backlash that has nothing to do with the event itself and has everything to do with the fact that she's stepping on an ancient program that got me through childhood, and that people have been so unsafe and unpredictable in my life since that I have not been able to face the terror of those early childhood memories and experiences and move back to a sense of safety. So even though for the last couple of years, I've been somewhat conscious of this pattern, it's different. It's a different thing to say. Like, it's one thing to say, there's a 10-ton pile of soot that's in the driveway that shouldn't be there, and it's creating a barrier. as long as it's there. It's another thing to do the work to clear a 10-ton pile of soot, when every shovelful triggers a psychological reactivization of the trauma center of innate terror and helplessness from early childhood. And when there isn't enough lucidity to understand exactly what's going on in the moment, it just feels terrifying. It's quite another thing to actually do all that. And it's very, very hard to do alone. And it is very, very hard, I've found, to find any kind of support within a Western framework of people that understand the wound, understand the symptoms, feel compassion for that child as opposed to angry at the adult they don't understand, who is really still locked in very young emotional loops. And the last thing that I want is my girlfriend, who is the first girlfriend in my life that I've allowed to be within 24/7 proximity of me, because I want control of things. I want this regular coming back to, this is my mine, these are my things, these are safe. I want my own space. So it's actually not the first girlfriend, it's the second girlfriend. And then, so, and there was issues about the first one as well. But this is the second girlfriend. And so, as we're coming back from the outing, she has already moved my speaker, which I didn't want moved, which I put on the restaurant table. She has picked up the raincoat that I had carefully placed with certainty that it would stay there right after I placed it there. And I feel outraged at this. The emotional charge that I have around this is, what the fuck are you doing? You think that after 42 years of living by myself, being smart and analytical and taking complete care of myself since I was 14 years old, you think that I don't know where I want my own raincoat? You really think that? I've put it down there right in front of your eyes 10 seconds ago. What the fuck are you doing? Not only that, I imagined you sitting down so that I could make some contact with you, and you're not sitting down. You're moving around in an unpredictable way. Who the fuck are you doing this for? I've told you multiple times. Stop this fucking attempt at false helpfulness. It's pathetic. I hate it every single time. No, don't ask me if I need some water. If I need some water, I'll go and get some water, or I'll ask you. Just cut it out. And she forgets. And then it's alarming to me. It's really alarming to me when I see this surge of helplessness, of anger, of frustration bursting forth at this complete, innocent, absent-minded woman who has traumas of her own. And it's like, this is not right. This is not what's good for her. And yet, it's even less good for her if I say, I've got to get rid of you, which is a withdrawal strategy I've used hundreds of times with people. I have got to end this relationship because I cannot be reduced into a frothing mass of seething fear, panic, anger, hate, helplessness, and insecurity just because you, like so many other people, insist on not asking, insist on ignoring my stated requests and boundaries, judge and attack me for the boundaries I set rather than understand that they are for both of our benefit, that you cannot interact in a social way with someone in a state of trauma. You don't know how to deal with trauma. You don't know how to recognize the symptoms of trauma. So it's my job for both of our benefits to keep us out of trauma. And if you will just shut up with all of your long-winded philosophical rationales about why I should want something else, and just respect that this works. If you will not touch my things and move them without asking, you will see a wise, kind, sensitive, generous, present, relaxed, adult human being. If you do, you are going to see a 4-year-old child in panic who's in even more panic because most of you do not have the imagination and the sensitivity to be kind to someone who's re-triggered in trauma. So I know that not only am I now sucked into this vortex of nightmare, I'm about to be judged, criticized, and abused for my reactivity. And believe me, if I threw gasoline on you and set you on fire, you would not calmly be saying, "Oh, Dane, could you remember, please don't do that. I told you 5 times, gasoline burns, da-da-da-da-da." But that's exactly how I feel when you repeatedly ignore what I'm saying again and again, and I go through the explosion of helplessness, rage, fear that is worse than being burned. And then the fear of insanity and all of that because I don't know what's going on. And then the feeling of grief that I'm treating you this way because I don't want to be this reactive to someone I care about. I don't want to be this reactive to anyone, but I am. I've been set up in this way by a culture that was fine to allow my parents to go through their entire abusive childhood and adulthood without diagnosing them or giving them any support, was fine to protect their right to have children before they were mentally, emotionally suited to do so, was fine to protect their right to abuse their children, was fine to support all the adults around them in turning a blind eye to obvious symptoms, is fine to put a whole population through school, from kindergarten through college, without understanding how to protect children from this kind of abuse and where the sources are. And then is fine to allow this whole cycle to continue on. That this is an ignorant, very unhealthy population in this area of childhood abuse, trauma, emotional, mental dis-ease. But it is a very critical and judgmental culture of anyone who is not, quote, normal, which is a complete setup because it sets 80% of the population up to develop strategies along this line that do not feel normal, then have to spend energy keeping them a secret and managing them, and then not being able to behave, quote, normally and then judging and attacking them rather than giving them any help. Because that's ultimately the rage at the end of it, that I would do anything not to have to feel this way just because someone's moving a stapler or whatever. And yet, that's the best adaptive technique I was given. And after $100,000 in therapy and 500 books and learning all the life skills needed to run my business, this hasn't come up. No one's offered anything helpful in this arena. And so I'm still dealing with it. And innocent partners are still dealing with it. And it is incredibly painful, the amount of grief and sorrow that this kind of thing has caused literally dozens of relationships to dissolve, painfully dissolve, and seen those people go away blaming themselves and not understanding it, blaming me and not understanding it, me blaming myself and not understanding it, and me blaming them and not understanding it. It is a pathological system of abuse. That level of ignorance is not only tolerated, but actively perpetuated by a culture that refuses to study emotional intelligence with anything like the rigor it studies scientific physical intelligence. The emotional body is as scientific as the physical body. It's as complicated as the physical body. But people spend 8 years becoming a doctor and don't expect to fully understand a physical body. And they spend no time at all studying the emotional body and shame and attack and abuse and throw it off balance, starting with parents, going on to school, then to peers and early dating, so that by the time you're 25, you have had multiple emotional abuses that are often deep wounds that are undiagnosed and begin to co-infect with all the adaptive strategies into other wounds. And so this is the buildup that, if not understood and talked about, could easily end the relationship with a very, very lovely and in many ways compatible sweetheart. And it has never been touched on. I worked with the Channel Lazarus for 30 years. I worked with the Human Awareness Institute privately and publicly in group workshops and stuff for 10 years, took more than 30 workshops. I did more than 1,000 hours with 30 reasonable to decent practitioners in therapeutic and energy and various backgrounds. And I've read over 500 books in the well-being, personal self-development, and all, business and all this terrain. And I did not even know the meaning of the word trauma until a stranger in a health food store mentioned it. I asked about it and bought the book 10 minutes later, Healing Trauma by Stephen Levine. And since that time, moving on through The Body Never Lies, The Body Keeps the Score, I've been able to piece together this narrative with lots and lots of writing, sifting, analysis, but also making lots of videos and notes like this. Because there is not a single professional that I have ever met that I could count on, regardless of what I paid them, to guide me into this process that I've just outlined. And that's why it's important to me to explicitly and in detail outline these mechanisms. Because if I've spent 60% of my entire life force energy managing just this wound alone, if it is reflected on every major decision of my life, if it's cost the United States more than $1 million, like I'm in Thailand right now, for the sole reason that Thai women will not, as a rule, attack what they don't understand. They will defer. So in other words, this looks like a completely irrational defense mechanism. But a typical Thai woman will just say, okay, thank you for telling me, and I'll do my best. And that's it. A typical American woman will say, no one's going to tell me what to do. Stop nagging me. Don't tell me that, as if this is such a big deal. I'll touch whatever I want, or you can find a new girlfriend. There's that kind of defiant attitude with no depth understanding. It's like, could we take 10 hours to really understand our psychology? Nah, I don't want to do that. I just want it to be fun, light and easy. That light and easy has set more people up in my life to hurt me and hurt themselves than I want to count. It's a terrible paradigm to abuse roughly a third of the population and then go into one relationship after another without doing detailed diagnosis of what's going on and why, and bringing compassion. Because any intelligent person could look at a child in this situation and understand the biological mechanism of PTSD and feel nothing but compassion, understanding, caring, love, and want to help. First, by not touching my things, and then helping me find someone that could lift the original trauma. Well, one of the reasons that this is exacerbated to an all-time high recently is my most recent therapist triggered all of this in the biggest way that has ever been done to me, while breaking the law and being inappropriately sexually and otherwise, and just exploded this stuff in my face, such that I've been in absolute desperation and panic while trying to make sense of where is this coming from. And I'm only now still piecing it together. And so I feel that if an international, if someone like me can go through this and not even get any help by age 40, there's got to be other people having these problems. So who's going to help them? I can't count on the professionals. So at least let me give a resource for sanity by putting this out there, and maybe someone else is dealing with the same thing on one side or another of it, and we'll have a better sense of what's going on. Because you cannot heal anything until you diagnose the issue accurately. And that has never been done on the outside for me. It's me sorting out the diagnosis piece by piece as it comes up. So what happens is, if I feel explosive rage and helplessness around a raincoat being moved, my rational brain says, there's more to this than meets the eye. Then I start filtering through all that I've read and this and that and the other, and it's like, well, what is that more? Let's take a shot at it. And so this is that shot, and I hope it helps. I want to end just with a prayer and an affirmation that we all deserve. Every child born in this world is coming in innocent, open, vulnerable, and with every right to trust the adults around them, to avoid trauma, to love and protect them. And if that cannot be done, that child should not be brought into the world. It's that simple, number one. And number two, as children develop coping mechanisms, as they start acting out and becoming delinquent in different forms, it's not the child. They're reflecting on the sickness within the environment, and they need help, not punishment, shame, and abuse.